the actually big world of web browsers and why you cannot compete against Google. Many people know the big few web browsers that everyone uses, and they might be familiar with the fact that lots of them are just forks of Chromium, where there is a bunch of forks of Chromium and then there's some Firefox and a couple forks of it, and then there might be some WebKit based Apple's Safari thing, their proprietary software and all that stuff. But many people might fail to realize that the world of web browsers is actually way bigger than this. You know, there's actually a really big world of web browsers out there. Lots and lots of small projects that are very obscure and not many people know about. But the problem with all of them is the fact that they are not really compatible with the web as it exists. The contemporary web we may have gotten accustomed to using the big few web browsers cannot really be used on lots of these smaller projects, smaller web browsers, because they do not adhere to the standards. That is specifically the W3C standard, where the W3C standard, it is way too bloated. And I'm not just saying this as some GNU+Linux user complaining about bloated software and whatever. No. That's not what's going on here. There is a very specific problem with the fact that the W3C standard is bloated, and that's just an arbitrary word to describe it. Really, the problem is that it's way too big. It is way too complex. It is vast, it is excessive. It's too huge. The fact is, because it's too big, it creates a barrier to entry that is way too high. Which means that people can just make a web browser. One can't just make a web browser. Even if they can create a software that renders HTML and does all the web stuff, all the hyperlinks and everything works. So it's a perfectly functional web browser, or it should be a perfectly functional web browser. It still won't be of any use when it comes to actually using the web as it exists. Going on the big websites that you might have been accustomed to with the big web browsers, they won't work. One can't just create a web browser that works with all those websites. It can't just be done. It's not easy because there's too much work that it requires. There is a standard, the standard which is too high. The W3C standard, it is obscene, it is ridiculous, it is absurd, way too high. People might make the mistake, perhaps maybe because people have been raised in their childhood with this, in the West specifically, and I guess many other places where with these sorts of capitalist worldviews and mindsets and ideas where people just talk about competition, where like there's this idea of competition. Well, let's just make a better competitor, like where, well, maybe Google is this big popular web browser, Google's Chromium. Well, let's just compete against it. Let's just make a better competitor. If people can't compete against them, then they are just not good enough. They are not just good competitors. Google Chromium is just the web browser that's just the best one. It has all the features and all the competitors are just bad, so therefore Google is just the best one. Google's Chromium. But that is a fundamental mistake, to think that it's just about competition, that one just has to be better at competing. You know, there's this big name that everyone has been talking about recently, this Ladybird project. And the thing is, like, people talk about that, like, well, it just takes a lot of effort to make a good web browser. But that's not really the case. Because the thing is, there is no competition. Google is the web, where the standard, it is controlled by Google, because they are the ones who control the web browser. Google's Chromium is the W3C standard. It is the web standard. And while there may be Firefox, where Firefox is paid by Google, they fund Firefox. And yeah, maybe some Apple's WebKit-based Safari thing might exist, yeah, whatever. But like, that's a few things still at most. Think about this. Even Microsoft had their Internet Explorer and various incarnations of it with the Edge thing and whatever. But even they just gave up and forked Chromium. And there's a reason why most of the web browsers people use are just forks of Chromium. There's a reason why every new web browser that gets started, most new web browsers that get started are just forks of Chromium. There's a reason Chromium is the standard. Well, that's because Chromium itself is the standard. Chromium is the only one that's really the standard for the web, because the standard itself is too ridiculously complex. One cannot compete against it. It's unreasonable to expect people to just compete. Have a free market. Go out there and just start up your own web browser and compete. No, that's not how it works. Because what you need is lots of resources to compete against Google's web browser, the Chromium. You would need lots and lots and lots of resources. So, will something like Ladybird succeed? Well, who knows? Maybe, maybe not. But even if it does, it's still just a few web browsers out there. I have more fingers on one of my hands, that is 5, than there are web browsers that people use out there in the world. That's way too few. It takes too many resources, way too big of an investment to make a competitor. So, it's not really about competition now, is it? One can't just do it. But it should be possible. It should be possible for a few people to come together as a team and to create some small project, a web browser. And it should be perfectly functional with the web. A person should be able to use that web browser and go to any of their random favorite websites, and it should all perfectly work. Because why shouldn't it? All you really need is an HTML renderer with all the web functionalities, and there's your web browser. That sort of thing is not difficult to do. It shouldn't be difficult. And yet, there is this big standard, this way too massive bloated standard, that is arbitrarily and with intention made too complicated for anyone to really implement. And even if a couple of people can pull it off, even if there's one Firefox and one WebKit-based Safari, and maybe some new Ladybird thing, even if there's just a few, it's still just a few. Not anyone can just do it. And that is the problem. The root cause of the problem here is the fact that the standard is too big. It is too complicated. It is absurd and it is excessive. It is too big. What the correct solution here is not to just, we need to try better to compete. We need to get better and do better software, and we need to try harder and get more money and donations and just do better. We need to do better to compete against the Google's web browser, because the Google's web browser is just that good and we just really need to compete against it. No, that's not what's going on here. That's not the correct way to solve this problem. So the creation of a better competitor is not it's not a solution, because competition is not even what's going on here. That is not relevant. There is no competition. Competition is not a thing. That's not a thing. I mean, I'm talking about this specific context here, not in general, but right here. There is no competition. Google is the web. Google's Chromium is the web. They decide what happens. They decide to abandon Manifest v2 and implement Manifest v3. And now that is the web standard. Everyone has to follow in their footsteps because they are the ones who lead the web. A few competitors, even if they existed, wouldn't be enough. And it's not about them having a monopoly. It's not about them having outcompeted everyone else. That's not what's going on here. there are arbitrary standards in place. That is the W3C standard. That is arbitrary, and that is destroying whatever opportunity for real competition could exist. For as long as there exists some arbitrary standard, some arbitrary threshold that one needs to surpass to have a functional web browser, for as long as that arbitrary barrier to entry exists, there is no competition. Competition does not exist in an environment like this. What we have is Google, who controls the web. They are the standard. Google is the W3C standard. Their Chromium project controls the web for a reason. And it's not a good reason. So the correct solution to solve this problem of Google controlling the web is not just, oh, we should try harder to compete against them. No. What needs to be done is destroying the W3C standard. Because that is the root cause of the problem. Where if every website uses the W3C standard, then the users of the web are stuck with those few browsers that exist that are actually compatible with the standard. And that is not going to be a big number of web browsers, since the standard is so big, it's too big. And so yeah, there is no competition. Because here's the thing, the small web browser projects, they do exist. There is actually a really big world of web browsers out there. You can go look up some really obscure web browsers that are really small projects that they have the basic functionality that a web browser should have. They render the HTML and they do the web stuff, all the hyperlinks and whatever. They are perfectly functional with the way the web is supposed to be. Those do exist. There are lots of small web browsers. So it's not like there isn't all that stuff going on. But the reason those aren't usable, even if they should be, is because everyone uses the W3C standard, all the websites that people actually use. So it's not even as much that Google themselves necessarily are the problem, in the sense that, you know what the problem really is? If you as a web admin make a website that requires that your visitors to the website use a web browser that is compatible with the standard, then you are a part of the problem. You as the person who runs that website, you are forcing that people use those few web browsers that are compatible with the standard. Because by requiring that the visitors to the website use web browsers that adhere to the standard, you are forcing that standard on them. So it's not even just Google who is doing this. It's every website that requires that standard. Google may make the web browser, the Chromium web browser, but Google is not the one who makes all the websites that require the use of that web browser. You can make a website that only requires the HTML rendering capabilities and the hyperlinks to work. You can make a website like that. So the people who make the websites are really the big problem here. They are really the biggest problem here. And they are the ones who are ultimately responsible for this problem. Now, whatever conspiracy theories you might come up with, that the Google is having a secret conspiracy with all these web service makers, these web developers and all these web admins and everyone who runs their websites all over the world, everyone who runs a website is in a conspiracy with Google. Well, who knows? It may or may not be true, but it doesn't matter really. Because in the end, whether it's a conspiracy or aligning interests or any other number of things, if you run a website and you require that the people who visit your website run a web browser that is compatible with that stupid standard, then you are the problem. And I say the correct solution here, what needs to be done, is not make a better competitor to Google's Chromium. I say we should not need the Google's Chromium. And we don't need to compete against Google's Chromium. That's not necessary, because that's an arbitrary standard. Someone just decided to declare that this is the standard, this is the W3C spec, and this is the standard you need to adhere to. Well, no, you don't. I say you don't. And I say stop following that standard. We don't need to make a better competitor to Google's Chromium. You don't need to use Google's Chromium. What we need is for everyone to stop requiring that visitors to their website use Google's Chromium. So how about instead of talking all day about how Google is this evil monopoly, you go after the websites. Go after the websites, your favorite website that requires that you use a web browser that is compatible with the standard. Complain to that website. Tell them that you don't like the fact that they require you to use a web browser that is compatible with the W3C standard. Every website, if it does not work on the Dillo web browser, it is bad, and you should complain to them that this website sucks. You should stop using the W3C standard. Stop forcing it on the people. Because that's the problem. If you run your own personal website and you require that the visitors have a web browser compatible with W3C, you are the problem and you need to stop. And people need to realize this. So people talk about, like I mentioned this, people talk all day, oh, Google is evil, Google is a monopoly, oh, let's make a better competitor, like, oh, nonsense. Stop making websites that require a web browser compatible with the standard. That standard is bad, stop following it, abandon the standard. That standard should just be abolished, it shouldn't exist. There should be HTML and like whatever basic small stuff like that. I mentioned the Dillo web browser. I mean, that's just one arbitrary specific web browser, an example. Dillo doesn't even have JavaScript. Dillo just renders the web pages and all that stuff. But it doesn't have to be Dillo specific, obviously. Just stop with all the nonsense. So yeah, stop crying about, oh, how Google is this big evil monopoly and whatever. As long as the websites bend the knee to the W3C standard for no real reason, that is the problem. Those are the people who should be crying about. Those are the people who should be complaining about. Go after the websites, because the websites are the ones who have the power to change this. You don't need to go after Google. You don't need to create a better alternative to the Google's Chromium. We shouldn't need a Google Chromium or a Google Chromium competitor, a Google Chromium-like web browser. We shouldn't need a thing that is like Google Chromium. We shouldn't need to reach that level of standards compliance. We should not have that barrier to entry. That itself is the problem. We shouldn't need that. There is no need to make a web browser that is compatible with Google Chromium and all of its standards. That's not necessary. That's not the solution. It may be a good idea to have that around, like if some Ladybird project succeeds, then I'm not opposed to it existing. So I'm not opposed to the Ladybird project. What I'm complaining about, what I'm talking about, is that we shouldn't need to make Ladybird be compatible with the Google's Chromium, because the Google's Chromium is too high of a standard for no real reason. It's arbitrary and it's useless, it's meaningless, it's nonsense. Go after the websites. This is not a problem with the web browsers. This is not a problem with the free market, and this is not a problem with competition. This is not competition, this is not monopoly, none of that is irrelevant here. The problem we have is that there is a stupid standard that the website providers impose on the visitors of the websites. If the website works without all the nonsense, it's just a HTML page, then anyone can use any web browser, and those web browsers already do exist. There is already a plethora of web browsers out there. Very small obscure projects that are perfectly capable of rendering HTML pages. They exist, they are out there. The problem is the fact that the websites impose the standard on the people. The websites are the problem. So there's no real need to make a really good competitor. Because all it takes to make a good web browser is a small team of developers who can make an HTML rendering web engine with all the basic web capabilities. That's all it really takes. And like that's it. It has been done. And there is a ton of web browsers out there. Various kinds of small projects exist. The reason they are not adequate is because of the websites. The websites don't offer compatibility with those web browsers. The websites are the problem. The web browsers do exist. There's a ton of them. There are a bunch of web browsers out there. They do exist. This is not a problem with the market. There is not enough competitors. That's not the problem here. The problem is the fact that the website, it doesn't work with a basic web browser. You can pick any random number, you can pick any random web browser, small web browser project. If you can't go to your website with that web browser, with a web browser that is basically perfectly compatible with what the web should be, if you can't go to the website with that web browser, then the website is the problem. Google is not the problem. Chromium is not the problem. Not even in some sense the standard W3C standard. Even that's not the problem in some sense, where those are just things. The real issue is that if you have a web browser that is perfectly capable of doing what a web browser should be capable of doing, if you can't go to a website on that web browser, it's the website that's the problem. Go after the websites. Stop getting distracted. One has to wonder just how stupid are people? How brain dead can you be? If all you talk about is, Google this, Google that, antitrust this and monopoly this and competition this, competition that. No, the websites are the problem. The websites are the ones who impose the standards on the users. We have web browsers. The web browsers do exist, they are out there. There's a bunch of them. You can pick any random terminal-based web browser that you can use in a terminal, and it's only keyboard-driven web renderer thing on a terminal. You can go find those web browsers. There is a bunch of web browsers out there. Not having web browsers is not the issue here. We have web browsers. The issue is that the websites don't work with them. The websites, they don't work with the web browsers. So yeah, the W3C standard. Stop following it. That's a stupid standard. That's ridiculous. That's not the web. The web is HTML and maybe some fancy graphics that might go with it, with some CSS perhaps, and whatever. Those are just some stylistic things, but really the functionality. A basic web browser. Google is not the issue here. The websites are. Google is the web because the websites make it so. The website requires that you use Google standard. Going after Google doesn't solve anything. Yes, you can make a competitor to the Google's Chromium and you can adhere to the standard. Yes, it might be a good idea to have Ladybird be a better option, an alternative to the Google's Chromium-based web browsers. Yes, those may be good things to have. But those are not going to solve the fundamental root cause of the problem. The problem being the fact that the websites mandate that people use the W3C standard. And it doesn't have to be the W3C standard anyway. Just any random nonsense that is just over-bloated nonsense, any other standards that may or may not exist in the future or now or whatever. Anything that is not just basic HTML and some basic web browser functionality is useless bloat and it should not be required. Here's my proposal for fixing the problem. At the very least, every website should be available in that old school form. That form that the websites existed in, back in the 90s, every website should be at least available in that version. If you want to have some if you want to have some fancy version of your website that the people with fancy web browsers can go to and see the fancy graphics, then yeah, fine, you can do that. Like you can still have Google's Chromium with all of its capabilities. You can still have the W3C standard around. You can still have that stuff around and have a version of your website that works with those things. But at the very least, you should have the option, you should provide the option for your visitors of the website or the users that they can use the website without all that stuff. It's not be required, it should be optional. If you want to make a website with all that stuff, it should be optional. It's not be mandated, it's not be required. The problem is the fact that the websites impose that on the users. If it requires that by law, the website providers make versions of their websites available that are compatible with a very minimal standard that is basically just a basic web renderer with all the basic functionality, then so be it. It doesn't really matter. Whatever means necessary, of course within reason, and let's not do a bunch of evil. I say you have to do everything in your power to make it so. It is unreasonable that the websites impose this standard on the people. It's the websites really who are the root cause of the problem. Because the websites themselves are the ones that the visitors go to. The web browsers do exist. A lack of web browsers we do not have. The fact that the websites don't work with the web browsers is the problem. The websites are the ones we should go after. Yeah. Just how stupid people are. It really pisses me off. Because people are distracted. It's a distraction. It's a sideshow, the Google business. No, who cares about Google and whatever they are doing? You know, I say Google is the web. But that's because the web is Google. The web forces Google on the people. Because the websites require it. You know, there may or may not be some positive feedback loop where everyone is using Google Chrome, so let's be compatible with Google Chrome and therefore everyone follows the W3C standard. But like, it's not really required. You don't have to follow the W3C standard. Like, no, not really. Like, you don't have to. You, as a website provider or web admin, whatever, who knows what they are called, you don't have to follow the W3C standard. No one is forcing you to. You can just make an HTML page and put it out there in the world. And then, now this is this is what pisses me off the most. Now this is ridiculous. Oh, but it looks ugly. Ugh. Fuck off. Get lost. Go die in a hole somewhere. I don't wanna hear you. Those people who crawl out of the deepest sewers of society, who complain about, oh, the website looks ugly. The website in the 90s, they look ugly. The fancy JavaScript looks fancy. Piss off. Go die in a hole somewhere. I don't want you here. No. No, that's nonsense. And also, I just mentioned this earlier. You can still have those versions of the website with the fancy effects going on. You can have those as an option. It can be available optionally for those who have those web browsers. You can still have that. I'm not forcing people not to use the W3C standard. What I'm saying is that they should at least have the regular basic web browser version available of their website. As in, at the very least, if you're going to make a website, it should be compatible with the basic web standard. And the basic web standard is the old school way of doing things. Just a basic web renderer and whatever basic stuff goes with that. So, at least that. Whatever else you do on top of that, whatever other optional versions you have available, you can do all that, whatever you want. I'm not forcing you to do anything. No, I'm not forcing you not to do anything like that. So yeah, you can still have your fancy graphics. So yeah, it's not even a valid argument for you to make that you wouldn't get your fancy graphics. You can still use Google's Chromium and whatever nonsense like that, and go to the website .fancy version and then see your fancy graphics. You can still do that, it's not going away. But what I want is that at the very least, everything be compatible with the basic web standard. I say that there should be some basic web standard like that is enforced by some entity, because if it's not done by the people themselves willingly, it has to be forced on them. Because, well, currently, the websites themselves are forcing the W3C standard. So, even in the current world order, we have the website providers forcing those standards on the people. Well, I say a better world would be where the basic web standard is forced on the website providers. Because the ones who make the websites, they should have no power over the people. That's stupid. I'd rather the people have the power over the websites. So, I'm in favor of a law that requires that every website provider make a version of their website available that is compatible with a standard, the basic standard. Whatever other versions, any optional versions with fancy graphics they do is up to them. They can do whatever they want. So I'm not taking freedom to do whatever they want, whatever other versions they want, away from them. They can still do all that stuff. If you want to make a fancy web browser that has a big, massive standard that it follows, and someone wants to make a website that uses that web browser's capabilities to the fullest extent, that's perfectly reasonable. I'm not opposed to that, because that's software freedom where everyone is just free to do whatever they want. And that is in spirit of freedom, so I'm not against that. But what I am against is that a website provider who makes a website forces the users to have a website to have a web browser that is compatible with some standard like that. Those sorts of standards should be optional. There should be, at the very least, available as an option that is required of the websites to have that option available, the basic web version. So for every website you go to, there has to be that basic version available. You have to be able to do all of your web activities, whatever they may be. And in the modern society, we have lots of them that are important. I mean, if you just take I guess banking is important. Yeah, whatever, banking. If you go to your bank's website and you do some banking things on the internet, you use a web browser for that. So what position do you think the bank should be in to enforce a standard like that on you? Well, I say that's stupid to allow them to require you to have a web browser that is compatible with a stupid standard like W3C. It's ridiculous. I say that a law should be in place that requires that all the website providers, and in this example, the bank, would have a version of the website available that is fully compatible with a basic web standard. So you can go to your bank's website that only has those basic HTML hyperlink functionalities and whatever things like some boxes, some checkboxes and text fields where you can enter information and those basic things that a web browser would have. You can enter some text fields and then you can do all the communications. All the processing would take place in the backend, and whatever the bank decides to do in the backend on their server, whatever processing they want to do there, that's up to them. They can do whatever they want, right? That doesn't concern the user of the web browser. The web browser itself is just an interface. It's a graphical interface to communicate with the server. The graphical interface, that is the website that the user sees, it doesn't need to have any complicated standard associated with it. It's just a page that shows the GUI information about the website. So whatever information you enter to the website, it goes off into the server and it's all processed in the backend. So there's no need for any JavaScript. You shouldn't need any random nonsense. It's just no. It's just away with all that. So yeah, if it takes a law to require web providers to make a version of their website available with only the basic website capabilities, then so be it. And I'm in favor of such a law. And I say you should be as well. Because that's the real solution to the problem. Then we don't need to make a competitor that is fully standards compliant to some W3C standard. Because you don't need the W3C standard compliance in your web browser for your web browser to be effective and useful out there in the world. Because if every website is forced to make their website available in a basic web compatible standard, then all you need is a basic web browser. And those are easy enough to make. A small team of developers can make one. And they do exist. There's a bunch of them out there. So you can go out there and pick any web browser of your choosing or make one with a couple of your friends if you are a programmer. Because a basic web browser is not that difficult to make then. So yeah, we don't need to have a web browser that is fully compatible with some big standard. Because such a standard shouldn't be required. Requiring that standard is evil. That is the root cause of the evil. So yeah, stop complaining about Google. What we need is a law that requires that websites are available in a basic web format. Right, so yeah, I think I've said what I had to say. Stop getting distracted on side shows and side quests. Making a competitor to the Google's Chromium, it's a side show at best. It's a minor side quest, a tangent that is useless. Who cares? You know, Google's Chromium is already free software. It's already Libre software. Why should you even have to redo it? There's no point. Why should you have to compete against it? Who cares? It's a minor side quest, a side show. It shouldn't be the mainstream big topic of discussion that everyone is talking about. Oh, Ladybird is here to save the internet. No, what the fuck are you on about? Jeez, how stupid are you people? What the fuck is wrong with you? Why are people so goddamn stupid? What the fuck is wrong with people? Why are they so ridiculously stupid? How fucking insane do people have to be? What kind of fucking clown world we live in? I mean, I already know that. People are stupid and we live in a clown world. I mean, that much is obvious to anyone who is paying attention. So yeah, like, oh jeez, but like, it's just so pathetic and so unfortunate that like even these people who like pretend as if they are like into this whole thing, like, oh, I'm into privacy and like freedom on the internet, like, oh, I'm against Google, like, what the fuck are you? You are missing the whole point. You are at best focusing on some weird side quest that is irrelevant and useless. No one cares, or like, I mean, no one should care. Obviously, a lot of people care for some reason, but they care about the wrong issues. I don't know, are people just that stupid? Or is all the mainstream content out there just some secret conspiracy that is controlled by some agency, some entity that is wanting to do all this evil stuff to distract people? I mean, that's all possible. You know, I'm just going on rambling about possible conspiracy theories right now. You know, maybe there is some big conspiracy that there is, like, the whole point, the whole reason all this talk on the internet is about these things is because it's all just a distraction to distract the people who would otherwise be interested in this topic and want to do something about it. They generate this artificial discussion to distract people from addressing the real problem itself, which is what I'm doing. So in order to distract people from discussing what I'm discussing, they generate this artificial discussion around this Google evil this and Google evil that. I mean, that's just a theory, but perhaps I'm giving too much credit to whatever entity would be responsible for such a project. Because if people are too stupid to fall into that, well, what the fuck, who cares then? Yeah, if people are so stupid they can't recognize this reality, then it's not necessary to have such a entity doing such a thing anyway, because, well, those people would just be too incompetent to do anything about anything anyway. Because if they can't tell that it's just a meaningless side quest, then what the fuck are they good for? You know, most people in general are just stupid clowns, like they don't do anything. They don't even try to do anything. Like, if you spend all day watching content on the internet about online privacy, but you never actually do anything about it, then what the fuck difference does it make? Yeah, lots of people just pretend as if they care about this. But like that sort of market of people genuinely does exist. Because like, take the ever-present VPN sponsorships on YouTube videos as an example. Those VPN companies, they wouldn't pay YouTubers big money to have the YouTubers promote their stupid VPNs if there wasn't an audience for using those VPNs. So clearly those people do exist, those people who want those VPNs for whatever reason. They are sold the VPN under the promise that they will get whatever. They are sold the VPN that in the name of privacy and whatever. So clearly that sort of market does exist out there. But those people are clowns. They only want the illusion of privacy. They want to have a software installed on their phone, some app that they can open and toggle a button that says enable privacy. And it's called a VPN. Oh jeez. That's unfortunate. We really do live in a sad, truly pathetic world where those people who like they pretend as if they are interested in some cause like some online privacy, and like all they really want is just the illusion of as if there's something actually being done. It's just ridiculous. What a clown world we live in, you know. But you know, that's just a random tangent I'm rambling on about now. But still, it's tangentially relevant, I guess, because it's all about the side shows. Yeah, like it's a side quest. Who cares? Like, I mean, I say, like, yeah, sure, having the ladybird may be useful, but I don't see why that should be the main focus at all. Like, I don't see why anyone should care about it. Like, who cares? I don't care if there's a ladybird or not. What difference does it make? We shouldn't need a web browser that is compatible with Google's Chromium and the WTC standard anyway in the first place. We don't need it. So what the fuck do I care whether Ladybird is made or not? What the fuck do I care how many competitors there are to Google's Chromium that offer the full W3C spec compliance? What the fuck do I care? I don't want the W3C standard in the first place. I don't want it. That's the problem. So stop going on these stupid tangents, these sideshows. Enough with this. It's just, I don't know, words, I can't put it to words just how ridiculous it all is. I don't know, like, what is it wrong with people? I mean, it's all possible that there is just some, it's all just artificial and none of it is real. All the content on the internet, I mean, it's generally like highly likely even. I mean, I don't doubt it at all that it's possible. You know, YouTube, after all, I mean, I keep talking about this on all of my speeches. I talk about this, I mean, many of my speeches recently. I talk about this. Centralized platforms are a problem. They are evil because they have the power over everything. When you go to a centralized platform like YouTube, YouTube has the power. They can show you whatever content they want. They can do whatever they want with the content. So if there is a secret agenda of them promoting all this sideshow nonsense, then yeah, that's likely. I mean, that's possible at least. They have the power to do that. YouTube as a company can definitely just pay some random individuals to make content about online privacy and just talk nonsense all day. Put on the show that they are talking about something. They put out videos where they say a lot of things but they really don't say anything. You know, that's perfectly possible. Why not? I mean, I imagine if I was the kind of evil person and I was in that position at YouTube, I mean, I guess I would do something like that. I mean, obviously I won't because I think that's evil and I wouldn't want to do it. But if I was like if I was just talking pure strategy, I mean, I guess like that would be effective because people really are that gullible. I mentioned those VPN ads or sponsorships. I mentioned that. If people really are that useless and gullible, then yes, you're having a thing like that, doing a whole, I don't know what, there might be a word for this, but I can't recall what the word is. So that's why there are these breaks when I'm talking about this. I can't seem to remember what the fuck to call this. Anyway, there might be this entity, some secret agenda of making this artificial fake online content about online privacy and whatever. That's perfectly plausible. In terms of pure strategy, I guess I would do it. Like, it might be a useful strategy. to shut down the discussion regarding the real issues, to actually stop the people from dissenting. Because the best way to stop the people from dissenting is to just distract them. You know, that's how controlled opposition works. When you control the opposition, I mean, yeah, that's the term for it, isn't it? When you have the controlled opposition, you as an evil entity, when you control the opposition, it works to generate the illusion of there being opposition, and then those people who would oppose you, they rally behind that controlled opposition, and then the controlled opposition doesn't actually do anything. They say a lot of things, but they don't do anything because you control them. So I mean, it's a proven strategy. That's why politicians and evil governments do that sort of thing. So I don't see why YouTube and the likes wouldn't do something similar as well. Why not? I mean, it's as good as doing it. I mean, that, or they are just utterly useless clowns, the content creators on the internet. I mean, it's one of the two. Like, it has to be one of the two. It's inevitable, because those are the two possibilities. Either the content creators are just useless clowns rambling on and on about useless tangents and side quests, but in this case they actually don't get anything useful done, and that's all they talk about, where the main focus is the useless sideshows. So talking about tangents and sideshows, that's not the problem itself. When those tangents and sideshows are the discussion, then that's useless. It's a lot of words, but nothing is said. An illusion of privacy, an illusion of advocacy for something, a controlled opposition. If one of the two, I don't know. It could be whichever one of the two, who knows. But yeah, geez, if they are not controlled opposition, then they sure are useless. Because, like, you talk about, like, no. We don't need a competitor to Google's Chromium. That's not necessary. Like, why should we? I don't see why that's necessary. I talked about this. While Google is the web, it is only the web because the websites make it the web. So yeah, do whatever means necessary within reason and within what is ethical, I suppose, to make it so that the websites don't force the standards on the people. Yeah. I guess the length of this speech does just extend because I just can't put it to words just how much it is ridiculous that the people do. Why not just solve the problem? Too many people, they just put so much effort into trying to work around problems. Stop trying to work around the problem, just solve the problem itself. Yeah, just please get on with the actual issue. I mean, I've heard enough of this sideshow. I don't care. What difference does it make? I don't care about the Ladybird browser. I don't care. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't have a world of meaning. It doesn't have anything. I don't care one way or the other. It doesn't make a difference. You can talk about privacy-centric browsers, or LibreWolf is better than Firefox. And indeed that is true. In the contemporary web, the environment that we have, yeah, sure, you are better off using LibreWolf than you are of other browsers. But still, if you just had a fucking HTML page for a website, you wouldn't need a LibreWolf. You wouldn't even need it, because you would just have an HTML page. It doesn't spy on you, it's just an HTML page. So, like, stop with the side quests. Solve the actual root cause of the problem. Why don't people just get their act together and actually do something about fixing a problem itself? Fixing the problem itself. Like, yeah, I am in favor of LibreWolf existing. I say LibreWolf is a better option for you to go for than some proprietary software like Google Chrome. Ugh. Oh, stay away from Google Chrome. At least Chromium is free Libre software, and there are forks of it which take out all the Google stuff like ungoogled Chromium. So if you want to use the Chromium base, then ungoogled Chromium is one you can use. But like, yeah, sure, you're still better off using something like LibreWolf. But we shouldn't need something like that. It just shouldn't be spying. Yeah, make a law against spying on the web. Make a law against spying on the people who go to websites. So then that the problem is dealt with. We don't need web browsers that actively take precautions against the spying. Well, actually, those would still be useful because I suppose some website might still break the law or whatever. Who cares? But like, anyway, those are circumstantial. What I'm talking about, though, is that stop with the side shows. I don't care. It's a side quest. So yeah, who cares if there's 5 or 10 or 100 different competitors to Google's Chromium? I don't want Google's Chromium to be the standard for the web in the first place. Yeah. Oh well. Whatever. Right. At least I'm not gonna make a website that requires some big web browsers. My EEP site on I2P, it is perfectly capable of being rendered and used by the Dillo web browser I mentioned. Dillo is a pretty good web browser. It is Dillo. Dillo. It's a pretty good web browser. My EEP site has been tested to work with Dillo, which means that you can use my website, my EEP site, on the I2P network with a web browser like Dillo, which means that any other web browser that has similar capabilities should work. I haven't tested it with all the web browsers out there. Every web browser under the sun, I haven't tested it with them, but it does work with Dillo. So you can go to my EEP site and use Dillo. So at least I'm not gonna contribute to the problem, but oh well. Whatever, I guess that's the end of this speech. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.